Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to our Somerset Solutions stakeholder event. This is our summary presentation. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll find this event useful, and thank you to everyone who's joined our previous stakeholder events, our landowner and developers one, our technical and our local authorities events. So thank you all for joining those and feeding into that. Just a few housekeeping things before I start. So this presentation is live, so you can pause this webcast by clicking on the video at any point, but it is best to follow this live. That way you can follow the question answers as they're happening. There is also the opportunity to speed up the playback if you are catching up. The live video stream is delayed by 15 seconds, whereas the question and answer is not. So it may take a few moments for us to respond to any of the Q&A. In terms of the Q&A, it's the same as before. So if there's any questions, please put them on the right-hand side of the screen. Type your questions in the box and then select send. There's the option to ask these anonymously. If you see a question which is similar to yours, a question you would like to ask, if you can like that question, that flags that to us that some people have got the same sort of thoughts. And then we'll be able to respond to that question. So yeah, we will be publishing this Q&A as we will do with the other previous Q&As. So please bear that in mind when you're asking questions. So this is our summary presentation event. The speakers here, we have myself, Oliver Bowers from Royal Haskonian. We have Peter Thornton, also from Royal Haskonian, and we have Alison Bond-Cooper, who are representing all of the Somerset local authorities here today. We also do have representatives of each of the local authorities that will be on hand for the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So just the brief overview of what we want to achieve today. So we're going to provide a bit of an update on the work we've done so far, just in case anyone missed that, but we're not going to go into too much detail on that or any of the strategy solutions, because that can be picked up on the recordings for the previous stakeholder events. This is mainly looking at the summary and the outcomes of our stakeholder events in terms of solutions. We'll be looking at the timescales for the next steps. We'll be looking at the Somerset local authorities and what they're planning on doing next, and then hopefully we'll be having a discussion at the end where you'll have an opportunity to raise any questions. So just in terms of where this sits within the other stakeholder events, so this is our final stakeholder event. As I have previously alluded to, we've had the developers and landowner stakeholder event to start with, followed by a technical stakeholder event and the local authority stakeholder event. So the idea of this is that it will feed feedback from all of those the previous stakeholder events, and we can present the key findings here today. So just to briefly look at kind of the background, so this all stems from the Dutch nitrogen case, which is looking at if you've got a pollutant affecting a designated site, in this case the Ramsar sites, you can't add any more of that pollutant to the area, to the catchment. It's how Natural England have interpreted the habitat regulations. So yeah, as everyone's aware, in terms of what the impact this is having, but just to reiterate the point that that we ourselves as the consultants and the local authorities are aware of the impact it's having. So on the stalled applications, the economic growth plans, kind of the loss of confidence from investors, and the threat to the economy and the job security. So yeah, we are aware of that issue. So I'll just put this in here. This is kind of the key themes from our previous stakeholder events. So I think the previous landowner and developer stakeholder event raised quite a few important issues for us, notably looking at the need for the urgent and short-term solutions, as well as longer-term solutions. Quite a few questions were raised on what can be done to treat the phosphates in wastewater. And hopefully we will be addressing that point later today. Looking at the subcatchment based mitigation. So what we mean by that is if your development is within a subcatchment, so i.e. the Tone, the Parrot or the Brew, so if your development is in one of those catchments, your mitigation also needs to be within those catchments. So we'll be having a short discussion on that towards the end of the presentation. There's concern that some of the solutions will not be able to fit into smaller sites. which is something that we were already previously aware of. Again, that was raised quite a few times in the comments, so we picked up on that. And looking at small developers, concerned that they might not have the ability or the capability to deliver some of the proposed solutions. So again, it's something that we were aware of for quite some time now. But again, the event just highlighted that. So just a brief update on our strategy work so far, in case anyone's missed it, just to provide a bit of an update. So we previously published the phosphate budget calculator at the start of this year. That's following a couple of months of development, and then we're also currently reviewing the surface water catchment, and we'll provide a bit more of an update on that later. Identifying the strategy solutions, that's kind of the stage that we're at now, and then looking at the screening potential suitable sites. So that's the work that we've been doing in the background. So in terms of the strategic solutions, we kind of presented several solutions previously. So just in terms of how we can broadly categorize those solutions. So we're looking at solutions that developers could potentially implement themselves to offset the phosphate from their own development, but also aware that there are some solutions that developers and landowners won't be able to develop themselves and may need to input from somebody else. And then equally, that there are kind of outside of these 2 points here, there are other solutions that are outside of the control of developers, landowners, and third parties. For example, kind of the catchment sensitive farming and that element of the work, and some of the Wessex Waters improvement plans. So we are aware of those solutions as well, but won't need to go into too much detail on those. So in terms of the solution assessment, I'm aware I've been through a little bit of this before, but I just wanted to reiterate the point. So we assess the solutions following a detailed literature review and best practice guidance, kind of internal workshops, kind of define them into 4 key categories. So you've got your non-policy solutions, wetland solutions, which we pulled out specifically, policy solutions, and the catchment-based solutions. So the solutions were assessed in terms of their timescales, so the timescales for delivery, but also the timescales for how long the solutions could be in place for. If there's any regional specific, so if they're specific to certain subcatchments, or if they're more appropriate in the upper reaches of the catchment, or kind of in the lowland areas, so upstream or downstream. Looking at the phosphate removal potential and trying to quantify that where possible. Looking at the management and maintenance requirements, that's something that's quite important. I think one of the key things we picked up on the previous stakeholder events is who would do the management and the maintenance and what the preference is for that. We'll come on to that a little bit later, looking at the additional benefits and how that could potentially tie in with the phosphate credits. So potentially looking at the flood risk, looking at amenity space, looking at the increase in biodiversity and habitats, but also how that can link up to biodiversity net gain and carbon offsetting, and provide a more of an incentive for these schemes. So you kind of got double benefits there. And the 4 key questions that we were asking ourselves in terms of what Natural England will want to see is it based on the best available evidence? Is it effective beyond reasonable scientific doubt? Does it apply a precautionary principle? And can it be secured in perpetuity? So ideally, we want to meet all of these these answers to these questions. We want to say yes to all of them. But in some cases, if you're not achieving in perpetuity, that only means that you can't provide that solution for the duration of the lifetime, but it could possibly be used as a bridging solution. And in terms of where in the best available evidence might not be available at the time, but that could always be developed, and monitoring could always be put in place to try and get some more evidence. So there are workarounds if we're not achieving all of those to start with. So just what I want to do is I'll briefly discuss what these solutions are, just as a reminder. I won't go into any more detail than what I previously have done, and then we'll kind of look at what the key outcomes and what the key findings of our stakeholder events have been. So starting off with SUDS. So SUDS are really efficient at sediment traps, and they can reduce the amount of phosphate that's loading to the rivers and the streams, essentially by increasing infiltration and having the phosphates taken up by plants. They're quite a common practice, and yeah, they're quite a lot of information out there. And they can be added to new developments or also retrofitted, fairly short term in terms of timescales. They do need to be specific to just development sites, and it's often that the SUD scheme will need to be designed specifically for sites. The long-term maintenance does need to be considered and secured. They also have additional benefits, as previously discussed, and they do meet a lot of the criteria that we're looking for, and they are a solution that developers and landowners could put in place themselves, which is why we're highlighting it at the start here. So in terms of the key questions and the key outcomes that we've managed to resolve here, so the management and maintenance of these SUDs is unlikely to differ from the current guidance, and there is the possibility to implement these through the Section 106 agreements to get those in place and to get approval and sign off on those. So the Seria 753 is kind of looks at the onerous maintenance regime that would need to be proven. So if the SUDs are designed correctly in accordance with that, then that should be sufficient. The local authorities enter into obligations with the landowners in terms of granting these. So that's necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. They say they can be, so we can use the Section 106 agreements to require payment and other provisions, and the terms are negotiated with the local authorities. But there is the option that these are enforceable on the original developer, but also against the subsequent owners of the land. So yeah, in terms of SUDs, that's quite positive feedback that we've received there, kind of how the management and maintenance could be delivered, and how the actual schemes themselves could be delivered, and looking at how they could be achieved in perpetuity, and the requirements of the local authority. So again, I think this is seen as a really key key solution, and something that might already be put in place on a lot of the development sites. And it's something that will be progressing further. So the next thing we looked at was package treatment plants. So package treatment plants being used to trace wastewater. I think it's important to note that there are kind of differences what we mean in package treatment plants. So the first one being that the package treatment plants ideally need to have extra phosphate stripping capabilities. So it's not just kind of standard package treatment plants. If you can use package treatment plants that have additional phosphate stripping mechanisms in place, that's when you really start to achieve the high end of the phosphate removal. So kind of looking at the 90-95% removal on these. And then there's also what we mean by package treatment plants. So we could have individual package treatment plants that are kind of in the rural areas that be serving very small developments that could potentially kind of be approved and becoming at a very low risk. But then we also mean package treatment plants that could be serving 10-20 developments that wouldn't meet those requirements. I think that's what a lot of the questions were regarding. Again, they're quite a short-term, medium-term solution. They're highly efficient. The building regulations kind of sets out guidance on how these can be implemented, and then there's potential to tie these in with wetlands. I think one of the key questions we had, I think what the main question we want to answer is how the package treatment plants can be incorporated in terms of the Wessex wastewater system. So we spoke to Wessex Water and asked kind of a statement from them. So I was just kind of trying to summarise the key points that they came back with. So the package treatment plants will require the kind of local planning authority, natural and the Environment Agency's approval. The main preference is to dispose of sewerage into the public system, and I suppose from Wessex Water's point of view, they need to make sure that they are compliant with the building regulations and the Environment Agency guidance, and they can't adopt any kind of private treatments unless they are constructed to those standards. I think so. In terms of the package treatment plants, it is possible that they could be more effective than draining to wastewater treatment works, especially where there is no permit limit, and kind of it could be seen as an alternative to the credit-based schemes. But again, and so that's just kind of Wessex Water's perspective, but we need to look into the view as whether or not these could be seen as sustainable developments, and if they can be achieved in perpetuity. And then kind of package treatment plants, if they are feeding into the Wessex Water system, they will need to they will require charges still, and kind of they are private, so the maintenance and operation costs will be associated with that as well. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to provide a bit more information on the package treatment plants and how these could potentially be adopted. But like I said, the preference is to go with the developments into the public system, and I suppose the key take-home points is that they need to be built in terms of the building regulations and the Environment Agency's guidance, and then that's kind of the main starting point and the main thing that needs to be overcome to start with. So moving on, looking at wetland creation. So constructed wetlands do tend to be one of the best solutions that we've identified. So that could be wetlands either within suds, it can be wetlands within rivers, kind of taking off the phosphates that are in the rivers, so either soluble phosphates or within the sediment, and also looking at wetlands downstream of wastewater treatment works and bringing the effluent onto the wetland site, kind of at a secondary treatment phase. In terms of timescales, these are much more medium and long-term timescales. Going to take quite a long time to develop them, to design them, for them to become established. But once they are established, they can be achieved for lifetimes of projects. So the main phosphate reductions we're getting is, first of all, by reducing a lot of the sediment fallout, and then also a lot of the phosphates is taken up in the reeds of the plants. The phosphate reduction amount is highly variable in these wetlands, and it's dependent on the size of the area, the velocities, the retention time, how long the water is on the wetland for. I think one of the key points is looking at the concentration inputs, also looking at depth. So there are lots of examples in the literature, and lots of examples from Australia, America, Ireland. Starting to be a few more UK-based examples. A couple kind of coming around in England now. In terms of the removal rates, kind of the 35-40% is more of a conservative estimate. There are some examples where you can get 60, 70, 80%, and they can take out a lot of the phosphates from the system, but they will require further monitoring to confirm what the removal potential could be. They've got a lot of additional benefits, looking at habitat creation, flood risk, water quality, amenity, education, also in terms of the visual impacts, so a positive aesthetics. And you can also consider the kind of the biodiversity net gain in terms of this, and carbon offsetting, so it's got quite high potential for other benefits as well. So the key outcomes, just to explain kind of what we mean by wetland creation. So we're mainly talking about the horizontal wetland creation, and so this is typically what we mean by a constructed wetland. So over the sediment basin, we got a lot of the fallout, and that kind of goes into the inlet pool, into the macrophyte zone when we get the plants taking up the phosphates, and out again on the other side. So the key outcomes of what we found from the stakeholder events. So kind of one of the key things we picked up was in terms of the management and maintenance of these wetlands. I think the preferred approach in most cases was that the management and maintenance would not be under the control of the developer and the landowner. I think it's fair to say that from the previous stakeholder events that was the main consensus. And then also in terms of our technical stakeholder events, and when we've been engaging with the Environment Agency and Natural England, I think their preference is also that that the management and maintenance is really important of these wetlands. So in terms of when the reeds are cut back, when the sediment is removed and desilted. It could be quite a specialist task. I think also their preference was for this to be done by someone with the appropriate knowledge and competency to do so. So then that kind of led us to who is the best person to be doing this. So we are trying to set up meetings and engagement with non-governmental organisations to see if this is an option. I think there's been quite a good feedback so far in terms of that, and that there could be these NGOs that are willing to take up the management and maintenance and see basically we'll engage with them and see what kind of conversation we can have regarding management and maintenance and how they could potentially alleviate some of the problems that the landowners and developers might be having in terms of that. In terms of getting these wetlands approved and getting houses occupied on the back of wetland creation. So we'll be pushing for an approach where you can predict what the removal efficiency would be of these wetlands and kind of comparing back against that in order to get the wetlands approved and get the buildings occupied rather than having to wait for the wetlands to become established and years of monitoring. We'll be pushing for an approach where we can predict what the outcome might be and then work against that, but that would need to be a conservative estimate, making sure that you're not overstating what the phosphate removal would be, which again kind of leads back to the point that these wetlands, especially the kind of the larger constructed wetlands, in terms of large house developments that they'd be offsetting, they need to be appropriately designed. I think that's something that was raised with speaking with the Natural England. So there is kind of emerging guidance on these wetlands and who would be the best person to design them, and kind of there's lots of constructed wetland guidance available. So I think the preference is that these will be a specialist scheme and require specialist input in terms of the designing. The possibility for wetlands to serve multiple developments, I think that's quite an important thing, that there is quite a high possibility, and that was kind of widely encouraged, that what you don't want is hundreds of wetlands popping up. So if you can combine developments into wetlands, that would be that could be achieved, and that'd be a really good benefit. And then also just in terms of if a developer or a landowner was to go through and create a wetland, and they were to find that actually they've got a wetland that's too big for their development and they've got kind of excess credits left over, they're looking at the possibility to sell those credits on to other developers who are in need of credits, just so that developer then can recoup some of the investment in the wetland, and they've still got their planning application to go through. And like I previously alluded to, there will be further guidance on wetland creation and who suitable parties are for wetland creation, and how the wetlands can be approved and can be answering a lot of the key questions that everyone has on the wetlands. So moving on to Wessex Water. So there's kind of there's five key ways that we can get the phosphate mitigation through Wessex Water schemes. I'll run through these and then I'll look at them in turn, and in terms of what can be achieved, what can't be achieved, and what the key findings we've found so far. So looking at Wessex Water introducing peat stripping to more wastewater treatment works, that kind of also aligns with the peat stripping at sites with existing mechanisms in place. So in terms of looking at what Wessex Water will be doing in terms of their AMP cycle, so their asset management plans, they've already committed to reaching certain targets, and the way that the Dutch nitrogen case and the guidance came out, it didn't really align with those asset management cycles. So we're already in the middle of an asset management cycle when the guidance came out. So in terms of aligning those targets with that, it wasn't the best timing. But Wessex Water, when they're doing their developments, they will be they won't want to leave all of their upgrades right until the last minute, so they will be upgrading some of their sites prior to the deadline, which is currently around 2024. So we looked at the possibility of bringing forward those sites if they were to develop it, and they've got the ability to run that, but for management and maintenance costs and looking at compliance with their permit limits, they won't be fully utilising the potential of those sites. So we look at is there the mechanism in place that contributions could be made to keep those sites running. So that's one of the potential things that we were looking at Wessex Water notifying where permit limits are reached before their deadlines. So that can be changed in the calculator. And looking at the 5 milligram per litre. So that's the value that we use where we're not entirely sure on what the permit limit will be, or where a wastewater treatment doesn't have a permit limit. That's kind of a precautionary value that we're using for unknown permit limits. And then also looking at reducing the sewage infrastructure and kind of the stormwater overflows as another potential solution. So kind of answering question 1 and 2 together. So this is taken from Wessex Water's recent policy update statement. So Wessex Water received quite a few queries, both from developers and kind of from our side as well, looking at how any contributions to existing removal schemes could be put in place. So essentially, keeping those the updated and the improved wastewater treatment works, keeping those on prior to the AMP7 cycle to achieve those credits. But again, this is not possible for this. The feedback we're getting from Westwater, it's not possible within their regulatory framework to do so, at least not at the minute. So the way that a lot of these water companies work in terms of the regulations and how these permit limits are set is quite a long process. And looking at the impact of what they have to regulate it, and in terms of a lot of water companies have limits on what it's like spending caps. So it's quite a complex regulatory framework for getting these permit limits out there. And at the minute, it's not possible within that regulatory framework for them to take contributions towards those recycling schemes. Moving on to number 3, so Wessex Water notifying where permit limits are reached before a deadline. So what the feedback we got from that is that a lot of the wastewater treatment works prior to the AMP7 deadline, so kind of the end of 2024 for most cases, they would only really be turned on 1 to 2 months prior to that deadline to make sure they're up and running. So the actual benefit of that, there's not really much benefit in doing that. So reviewing the 5 milligram per litre, as I previously mentioned, so Wessex Water provided with some really useful data on what the predicted permit limits, or the measured output of in terms of the phosphate concentrations are from a lot of their wastewater treatment work sites. So we'll be looking at that data and seeing what we can take from that, and then approaching Natural England Environment Agency in regards to if we can get different permit limits, or if this 5 milligram per litre value could potentially be reduced. Because I think one thing that we've really picked up on in terms of when we've been developing the calculator and running sites through the calculator is that where a site drains to wastewater treatment works with a permit limit of 5 milligrams per litre, it tends to be more of the rural areas, but the loading from wastewater is extremely high, especially when if you compare that to some of the AMP7 permit limits. So it might be going from 5 milligrams per litre to 1 milligram per litre or 2 milligrams per litre, and the difference in wastewater loading it can be really significant. So what we're trying to do is, if we've got the evidence there, and it's useful evidence, and it's we can back that up, then we're trying to approach Natural England and Environment Agency to say, actually, could we potentially use this value? And what that will do is mean that when developments go through the calculator, what the calculator puts out, the wastewater loading will be lower. And it'd be kind of, this is quite a precautionary approach, the conservative estimate, the 5 milligrams per litre. So yeah, we're just trying to reduce the loading that's coming out of the calculator, but basing that on really useful and appropriate data. And then finally moving on to number 5, so looking at the leakages from sewer infrastructure and stormwater overflows. So it's quite hard to quantify this issue. I think that could be one of the key problems in terms of looking at that as a solution. So looking at repairing buffer strips, So what we mean by that is essentially is woodland or grassland that sits in between a farm. So it could be livestock farming, could be arable farming, could be any sort of major inputs of pollutants from farmland into rivers. So it kind of sits sits in between the farmland and the rivers. It's a fairly well established mechanism. It's been put in place by other schemes already. So they you can have quite high removal potential in terms of these flowering buffer strips. They are regional dependent, so they tend to be better suited to the upland areas, just because in the more the lowland areas there are lots of drains that could potentially bypass the buffer strips and reduce their impact. So that they take out the phosphates by increasing infiltration. Some of the plants can also take up the phosphate from kind of the accumulation in the soils. So they're fairly, in terms of timescale, short term to medium term, and there is the potential to retrofit to upgrade existing buffer strips, and there's a lot of those in place, applicable to most farming types really. And they also have additional benefits as stabilising riverbanks, improving water quality, and reducing erosion. So I think kind of one of the key things to consider in terms of the key findings on these buffer strips. So we've provided with some guidance that Natural England have produced in the last year or so, and it's really useful. Kind of really develops our understanding of these buffer strips and exactly what is required for specifically for phosphate removal and how that could be implemented into Somerset. So there is the potential to extend. We're looking at is there potential to extend the existing mechanisms to allow developers to contribute to new buffer strips. So what we mean by that is that the kind of buffer strips are already put in place with the cross compliance. So they do tend to be quite small, 1 to 2 metre buffer strips, and then you've also got the countryside stewardship scheme, which do tend to be a little bit bigger, 4 to 6 metres. Some can be larger, kind of up to 10 metres, but again, still fairly simple grass buffer strips. So what we tend to find when we're reading the literature is that the larger the buffer strips, the greater the phosphate reduction will be. So kind of looking at least kind of 10 meters, anything upwards of that, you tend to see the really high removal rates. And also not just looking at grass buffer strips, but also looking at woodland planting, looking at energy crops, making sure that the buffer strips aren't there's no access across. The increase using agricultural machinery on that can damage the soils, which will reduce the infiltration capacity of the soils, actually reduce the phosphate removal efficiency, equally kind of allowing livestock to graze on those areas, can provide waste input into the rivers and kind of removes the point of having the buffer strips in place. So yeah, in terms of what we're seeing for phosphate reductions, it tends to be a little bit more complex than the kind of the simple grass buffer strips, and there's plenty of guidance, kind of emerging guidance on these. I think it's something that, especially with the discussions we've been having, it seems like it's an even more of an important solution, and it could be something that could be put in place across Somerset. So that the cost varies with complexity, and obviously the land take, the larger the buffer strips, the more land take is going to be required, which again is taking land, removing land that could otherwise be used for agricultural purposes. But with the increasing complexity and the increasing cost, you also do tend to find increased phosphate removal potential. In terms of the field drainage, it's quite important that if field drainage is in place, that could potentially compromise the ability of the buffer strips to remove the phosphates, essentially kind of bypassing, because it needs to be overland flow, and it needs to be not really channelized flow either, but there's potential to incorporate small wetlands. So we're not kind of talking about the constructed wetlands here, we're talking kind of 0.1 hectare wetlands, so much smaller in scale, and feed the drainage into that. Other improvements to river banks could also be put in place that can get really high phosphate removal potential. So I think it's quite important to note in terms of how this fits with other solutions. So we're looking at taking agricultural land completely out of use as a solution, and the land take options from that is huge. The amount of land that would need to be taken out of use, kind of to the scale where it would have implications on the feed, the food production in Somerset as a whole, and kind of a massive impact on the farming industry. So I think it's quite important to note that if these buffer strips were to be put in place and the kind of the more comprehensive buffer strips, you could be achieving really high reduction rates, looking at kind of 80%. We've only taken out a small part of the field out of use, as opposed to achieving 100% and taking the whole field out of use. So it's an option that could achieve almost the same removal rate as taking the land out of use, but while still keeping majority of that land still in use. So it's why something that we're putting quite a lot of effort into at the minute. And it is likely that some farmers will take up this option to remove their own phosphate reductions, which could limit how much and how much well the potential that this is for rolling out across the whole of Somerset. But I think that there will still be, it's still a suitable solution for developing. There still will be suitable areas where these buffer strips could be implemented, and how these could achieve the phosphate credits. So just moving on to silt traps. So silt traps is installing silt traps on land, essentially to catch sediment-bound phosphates within that silt and periodically removing that. In terms of the key findings, when we've had discussions on this, there's only really one take-home message, and it's a concern that farms really shouldn't be producing that much silt, and they should have mechanisms in place to make sure they basically have no silt running off from their farms. So it's kind of the question of whether or not this is suitable to have this as a solution. It's something that farmers should be doing already, and if there's to have that as a solution. So it's kind of that's the key discussions that we've been having in regards to silt traps. So changing land out of agricultural use, I kind of already talked about it in terms of it's a solution that it's a short-term solution, can be seen as a bridging solution, but the land take implications are significant across the whole of Somerset. And again, that's the kind of the key take-home message, is that it's not a solution that can be widely used. And then we're also having discussions with regard to stocking densities and how they could be incorporated, and we'll seek a response from Natural England in regards to that. So reducing water usage. This is not something that I think was shared with all of the stakeholder events. That's something I wanted to touch upon now. So it's essentially the principle that if you reduce your wastewater loading from a development that's going to a wastewater stream that has a permit limit, you will reduce the total phosphate loading into the catchment, and essentially you could achieve phosphate credits that way. The key problem, you can see at the bottom there, can it be secured in perpetuity? Yes, but only in some circumstances. So the principle behind it is that you can put in place water efficiency measures, and so looking at fittings, essentially, so toilets, showers, basins that would use a lot less water per person, but in terms of actually securing that perpetuity and guarantees that the appliances would meet the same requirements, it means that it's unlikely to be achieved in perpetuity for a lot of developments where there's no control over what could be put in place. So if a developer was to develop this house and it was to be occupied, in 5 years' time, someone could just replace the shower head, or replace the shower as a whole, or put in a much larger bath, that then the water usage per person would be increased, and there's kind of no guarantees that what would be put in place, that the new system would be meeting the same water efficiency measures. So that's why it's not really something that can be rolled out across all of Somerset. It's mainly applicable where there is control over the water usage, which might be applicable to some of the local authorities. So what we're doing is we're trying to clarify our approach in Utterlingan and calculating if there is the potential for phosphate offsetting credits there. So that's one thing that we have been looking at. Another thing that we just wanted to touch upon is kind of the change to the IDB practices. It's something that we discussed ourselves and was pointed out to us in a little bit more detail to see if there is the potential for kind of phosphate credits, but also changes to the to see what areas, what subcatchments are actually contributing the load and how that impacts each of the individual SSI units that make up the Ramsar site. So essentially it's looking at, is there any changes to the IDB's practices that would reduce the loading from the rivers to the Ramsar sites. So that could be seasonal variations if some mechanism, if they to change some practices or change flows within specific ditches, could that potentially reduce loading to Ramsar sites? It's something that we're going to approach the IDB about, but yeah, hopefully we'll be able to provide more of an update on that in the future. So the other outcomes that kind of didn't really fit into specific categories, but I think it's still really important to cover. So I think one thing that kind of take-home message from all the stakeholder events is that the strategy that we're producing needs to provide more details on how mitigation could be approved. So that's one thing that we've picked up on and we'll be taking forwards. I think one of the key outcomes of the strategy will be the need to track the phosphate credits, but not just phosphate credits, also looking at the other environmental benefits and potentially creating a platform for landowners and developers to interact. I think that's something that is missing, and I think it's something that could be that when you're looking at a lot of the different solutions and what the key questions are for a lot of these solutions, it's quite a recurring theme. So that's why we've picked up on that. Looking at additional benefits. So it's encouragement that schemes could provide multiple benefits, and that's kind of adding an additional incentive that's not just phosphate credits potentially that could be achieved. So it's looking at carbon offsetting and biodiversity net gain. Next thing we wanted to touch upon is the catchment-based approach. So what we mean by that, I touched upon it at the start, is that if your development is within a subcatchment, so that the Tone, the Parrot or the Brew, then your mitigation also needs to be in that subcatchment. So we spoke to Natural England about this and kind of questioned what their decision making was behind this. So the response that they gave was that it needs to be that we're looking at mitigation as opposed to compensation, and that if your development is increasing the phosphates, that will be increasing the loading to one of the specific SSI units that make up the Ramsar site, then it's appropriate that your mitigation would also affect that same Ramsar site that is where the increase in phosphates is, and what they don't want to see is certain areas kind of that are getting a lot of increase of mitigation. So the phosphate removal is kind of preferential in certain areas, while other areas are getting worse. So essentially, your development could be loading, and lots of developments could be loading to one of the SSI units, and that would be just increasing the phosphates and getting worse, while another one of the SSI units, where if the surrounding land is more suitable to offsetting schemes, that will be getting a lot better. But the actual loading that the developments are producing would be making the one that the Ramsar site, their drainage are potentially worse, and would only be mitigating elsewhere within the catchment. So that was the main approach that we got there, just to clarify on that, and then also looking at the potential for SIL and how that could be incorporated for the for taking contributions and approving planning applications. But I think there's quite a lot of difficulties with that, mainly associated with exemptions and some developments eligible for relief and exemptions from the levy. So it's something that we're still discussing as to how that could be put in place. But that's just an update on what our work so far in regards to that. So next we're looking at I suppose our next steps for our work on the strategy side. So confirming, so I'll just go through the kind of the key outcomes from our work and looking at timescales of so when these can be achieved. So the key area, one of the key things is looking at the area of risk, and there's quite a few questions in the last stakeholder events in regards to when this will be ready. So what I mean by this is essentially the catchment mapping. So there's two elements to the catchment mapping. One is the surface water catchment. So Natural England initially provided a surface water catchment map where all the surface water, where will it run off to? Will it flow into streams that then flow into the Ramsar sites? So we've been looking at that surface water map and looking at topographical data to look at where we think the surface water would run off into. But given the complexity of the issues around the Somerset levels and the different connections and the pumping, it's not quite as simple as that. So we've got to look at specific connections and establish if there is potential for phosphates to go and in what direction as well. So, is it a case that phosphates can travel in one direction, or is there potential to travel in both directions? So we've kind of proposed that to the IDB, and we've highlighted some of the key areas where we need to know, is there a connection and in what direction can the nutrients move? So we're still waiting to hear back from that, but once that's concluded and we can get the outcomes on that, then we'll be able to approach Natural England with our surface water catchment map. And what we're going to do is build into the wastewater treatment work catchment. So what we mean by that is that each wastewater treatment work will have a geographical catchment around it where development will drain to that wastewater treatment works. So we kind of want to overlay that map onto our surface water catchment map to see how they align and see if there are some developments that are located outside the surface water catchment map but within the wastewater treatment map, or if there are some developments that are only located in the surface water but their wastewater doesn't drain to the Ramsar sites. And once that's all completed, we approach Natural England with our completed map, and we'll agree a final surface water catchment map that can then be digitalised and rolled out, and that'll be accepted. We understand that there's the importance of the timescales with regard to this, and if we don't want people committing additional resources and money and time into something that they don't necessarily need to do. So we really understand the importance of getting that sorted. I said we're kind of waiting back from the IDB, the Somerset Drainage Boards Consortium, on their response, but hoping that can be done within the next couple of weeks. So we've got a timescale of 3 weeks for that. Then looking at the types of developments that are affected, so done a little bit of work into this already, looking at campsites and looking at hotels, kind of overnight accommodation and commercial developments, and how they can be incorporated into the calculator, and the role they have in terms of the phosphate loading. So again, just in terms of completing that, we'll be looking at a timescale of 3 weeks. Then looking at the solutions report, so we've been producing a solutions report, kind of summarising all of our main ideas, and that's kind of what's fed these stakeholder events into the solutions that we presented. So kind of that report's close to completion, and we were basically waiting for the feedback from the stakeholder events to complete that report. So that should be done fairly quickly following these stakeholder events. One of the key things we need to do is the calculation improvements. So we're still dependent on Natural England's guidance with regards to updates to the calculator that have been in the pipeline for quite some time now. Unfortunately, they're being delayed by other cases and other implications on nutrient neutrality elsewhere in the UK. So I think in terms of timescale when that guidance might be coming out now, we're probably looking at kind of October, November for that guidance, when we can then put those recommendations into place in terms of Somerset calculator. But we have had a little bit of feedback already from Naturally in terms of minor updates. Feedback from yourselves and people that are using the calculator as to small improvements that could improve the functionality of it, and we've got a big long list of those. And I think that we were initially waiting to do one big improvement when we had the Natural England guidance, but I think now that that's been delayed, we plan to put in those amendments in the next couple of weeks. We've already started that process, so that'll be a case of just finishing that and then updating the calculator on the websites of the local authorities. So that's should be coming fairly soon. And then looking at the nutrient neutrality policy and the draft SPD. So yeah, looking in terms of timescales for that, it's more likely to be October at some point for that. So just like to pass over to Alison now, who's going to provide kind of a joint update on what all of Somerset local authorities are doing and the ongoing joint work.
Thank you, Oliver. Just to introduce myself, I'm Alison Blom-Cooper. I recently joined Somerset West and Taunton as the Assistant Director for Strategic Place and Planning. What I'm going to present here is the work that we've been jointly doing across the Somerset authorities, not anything that individual local authorities might be undertaking over and above this. So all the local authorities are here and will be able to take specific questions on the work they're doing. Perhaps I could just say at the outset that obviously this came as a surprise to all the authorities when we got the letter from Natural England, and we had no prior warning of it. But the Somerset authorities have taken it very seriously and are keen to develop and facilitate solutions. And that's the reason why we've commissioned the work for Royal Haskoning that you've just been hearing about, to try and do that. However, I should stress there isn't any statutory requirement for the authorities to do this. We're doing it because we recognise the impact in particular on small and medium enterprises and the local economy. And we're very conscious of our duties to meet our housing requirements within our local areas, and to deliver on our 5-year housing land supply requirements, but also a more general housing duty and need to provide affordable housing and so on. And I should also stress that we are liaising with colleagues across the country. As many of you know, I'm sure, Somerset's not the only part of the world that is experiencing this phosphate problem. We have a number of authorities across the country who are experiencing it similarly. So we're looking to share knowledge through those authorities and to try and develop solutions. And we have been working through the Planning Advisory Service to share that knowledge and learning. I think it's important to stress, though, that no one has yet found a long-term strategic solution. I saw in the chat that there's a view that we should be seeking more central government, and I'll come back to that shortly, because I think we would all agree with you that this isn't something that Somerset authorities can sort out by themselves. We need central government support to do so. In terms of what we're doing, you've heard from Oliver what the next steps in terms of the Royal Haskoning work is, and we will be continuing to do that joint working to develop a nutrient neutrality policy and the draft SPD supplementary planning document, which will go out for consultation. And alongside that, the councils are also seeking legal advice to understand how, when phosphate credits become available, they can be allocated in a fair, transparent and legally compliant way, because as well as meeting our habitat regulations duties as a competent authority, we also need to meet our duties as local planning authorities as well. So we have to balance those two things. We are continuing to engage with third-party trading platforms, including N-Trades, and we're seeking legal advice, particularly around how that would work, and particularly the long-term management and maintenance, which we've heard about already, and what enforcement powers the local authorities would have to ensure that any projects delivering credits are maintained in perpetuity. We do recognise that these third-party trading platforms are potential short-term solutions to release some of the development which is currently being held in abeyance, and so we are keen to look at that. Looking more widely, and this has been mentioned before, we need to continue to engage and lobby government to raise the profile of this issue. The authorities have recently written a joint letter from the leaders to both DEFRA and MHCLG Secretaries of State, but we are still waiting an answer. But I would like to assure everyone that we do see this as a clear plank, and that we as local authorities recognise that we need central government support to deal with this matter as the most effective solution. So we will be continuing to do that work. We will also be responding to the future water consultation deadline, which is 27th of September, and would encourage other affected parties to do the same. We will be seeking to inform and influence future investment plans for Wessex Water, for example, the Asset Management Plan 8, and to identify longer term solutions via improvements to the wastewater treatment works. We are committed to ensuring that everybody is aware of what's happening through regular updates to our website, future briefings, and newsletters, and so on. And we are continuing to engage with the key government agencies, as well as the letter writing and speaking to DEFRA and MHCL representatives, also working with our colleagues in Natural England and the Environment Agency, and indeed Homes England, to raise the profile of this issue and to make sure that we can develop a longer term solution, because I think we all recognise that what we're looking at here is probably shorter term solutions, and whilst we might be able to deal with some of the proposals that are currently being held, we are not going to be able to address all the future growth, and this will become particularly live with, you know, when we're trying to produce a Somerset-wide local plan, which will be seeking, following local government reorganisation, to deliver the growth for the area in the future. We will need to have a longer term solution. Recognise this is not probably what people want to hear, but we are currently not able to say exactly when sites will be unlocked by the work that we're doing. But I just want to reassure you that the councils have committed significant resources to seeking to address the issue, and we'll be doing our utmost to try and unlock the growth that's currently being held. Thank you.
Okay, so we'd just like to open the floor now to further questions, comments, and further discussions. So I think we'll start by looking at the question answers that have already been submitted and working our way through those. And then, yeah, if anyone's got any further questions, please put them in the chat box now. Just a reminder that if you are looking through the question and answer session, and you do find a comment that is similar to a question that you'd like to ask, if you just give that a thumbs up, and we'll be able to pick out which are the most recurring questions, and that means it doesn't flood our question and answer box with the same sort of questions. So we'll start there, and as I previously said at the start of the presentation, so we have myself and Peter from Royal Haskoning, we have Alison, who you've just heard from, and then we've also got representatives from all the different local authorities within Somerset. So if you have any specific questions, they will be on hand to answer some of those questions. So one of the first questions is where the Q&A will be published to. So yeah, we are collating all of the responses to the initial stakeholder event, and we'll be doing the same with this event as well. And once we've got the responses completed and finalised for days, they'll be going up on the local authorities' websites, and links will be sent out, and that can also tie in with the newsletters that will be going out as well. So yeah, you hope to be able to see those so shortly.
I tried to kind of allocate a few questions that kind of recurred and came up to try and help you out with this. Towards the start of the presentation, there's quite a few questions on packaged treatment plants, mainly kind of focusing on how it's already been put forward and rejected. So I think people kind of want a bit of I don't know if you mentioned in the presentation if they wanted a bit of an update as to how this is going forward and things like that, because that's kind of the questions I was checking if you have any answer to that.
Yeah, so we'll be able to provide more a written answer in terms of the package treatment plants and going forward. But again, I suppose the key message we were getting from Wessex Water was making sure the package treatment plants comply with Environment Agency guidance, as well as kind of building regulations.
Okay, cool. There was a lot of questions on timescales. One was obviously timescale of SPD, which you've mentioned, and the Q&A, which you've just mentioned as well. And there was also the dialogue with Natural England and local planning authorities. So I just raised that now just because it seemed quite important. Like a lot of people have been raising that same question. The same with minor kind of development as well. So that was just one thing that I mentioned. And there was a lot of questions on wetland creation and kind of the expense and size of the area. So kind of like further going to like where who will come from and when. The Constructive Wetlands Association, if we're like in talks with them, with the Rivers Trusts, if there's anything for further potentially more than your presentation you'd like to maybe expand on regarding that.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, in terms of the technical stakeholders we're engaging with, so yeah, we're engaging with all of those technical stakeholders. So looking at Somerset Wildlife Trust, Rivers Trust, and yeah, all those key technical stakeholders, and trying to get a engagement with them and how we could potentially develop these wetland solutions, and then more specifically the management and the maintenance. Yeah, I suppose we'll be providing more detail on the constructed wetlands within the solutions report, and look more details on how they can be implemented. But as I said, there's a lot of guidance out there. One thing that we will be looking at is how cost effective the wetland solutions are and the land take that might be required. Kind of just doing a cost appraisal of how much land will be required and the cost of wetland creation. So that's something that we're currently developing in terms of our solutions report. So trying to quantify the offsetting potential and looking at the cost. So basically how much it costs per kilogram of phosphates.
Although recognising that each individual wetland design and site and location, etc., will have so many parameters that people need to be aware that the actual cost is very difficult to determine, because we need to know where the wetland is and its size and scale and design and operational maintenance activities and all that kind of thing. So I think we can provide, or we will be providing, indicative costs. Or a range of costs, I should say, just to give people an idea. But in reality, we're not going to be able to give a flat cost that everyone can take away and go, well, I need X pound per kilogram in order to design a wetland. I think it's still worth us going through each of the individual ones just to make sure that we pick them up.
The last thing I say was a bit on end trade credits, and kind of Wessex Water. So to require so there is more kind of, if Wessex Water figuring out kind of like a figure, kind of pounds per plot figure, all of that, but that's, I believe, mainly through their website that they update that, right? Have we been in much talks with?
Yeah, so most communication will go through the Wessex Water website, and I think it's just probably more of a question for them to answer. I wouldn't be able to provide an answer on that at the minute. Yeah, I mean, if there are any specific questions in terms of the question and answer, we can try and get an answer from Wessex Water, and they've been really useful last couple of weeks in trying to provide us with more information. So yeah, we'll try and provide as much information in response to the Q&A as we can.
And then the rest, kind of, if we just look at the likes and stuff like you said and go through them individually.
Yeah, so let's move with that and move on after that first question on the Q&A. Although I note the question on the Q&A was regarding March 2021 event. I think that's potentially something that is directed towards the local authorities. I don't know if anyone there has a particular response on that one.
Yeah, happy to take that one, Peter. It's Helen Vittery from Somerset County Council. It's been quite a job to collate all of the questions and answers. We are pretty much there now, and we're hoping they're going to go up in the very near future on each of the websites for the local planning authorities.
Excellent, thank you. Then the next question is really in relation to Wessex Water and this opportunity or an idea of providing contributions to improve their phosphate stripping, etc. And I think this really was answered to a degree by Oliver earlier in the presentation, in that Wessex Water work to they have a lot of restrictions on how they work, and therefore the response from them is that they can't take extra sort of contributions to either upgrade or bring into earlier operation some of their upgrades that they are working on for the current AMP cycle. So unfortunately, the whole issue or question in relation to the wastewater treatment works and increasing phosphate stripping across the board there is really one that is answered by us saying, this can only be influenced by the next AMP cycle. As the local authorities have said, in terms of their joint working that they're doing, that they will be pushing Wessex Water or encouraging or doing as much as they can to influence the improvements in the next AMP cycle to provide a hopefully longer term solution to this. And next one is regarding non-policy solutions and SUDS. Obviously, I guess this one raises the point regarding the implementation of really development specific actions at this stage in order to allow planning applications to be processed. And Oliver can probably help me a little bit on this one, but my understanding is that there's the new guidance that Natural England are bringing out will have a bit more information on how to both calculate and design the SUDS to improve the phosphorus reduction or the phosphorus offsetting or removal on site. So hopefully to bring more sites into phosphate neutrality or certainly lower their phosphorus requirements. Is that right, Oliver? Because that was what we had from a meeting with them, that they mentioned that.
Yeah, that's correct. So we're expecting some updates on the SUDS and how they can be implemented in the calculator with that upcoming Natural England guidance. And we should be in a much better position to look at how they can be incorporated into the calculator and in terms of the solution and kind of more the finer details of the phosphate offsetting. I think quite a lot of the other elements of the solution are well established and confident and they're in place. It's just looking at the actual phosphate reductions and in terms of the calculator. So yeah, we're still waiting that guidance, but hopefully once we get that, we'll be able to move forward on that solution.
Yeah, and obviously it doesn't necessarily help anyone right now, but obviously, you know, the design of SUDs can be undertaken along with you know, specific calculations to show how much phosphorus they will hold up or remove from the system. That can be calculated separately out with any of the work we're doing, because it would probably tie in with the constructed wetland or integrated constructed wetlands calculations for phosphorus removal, which, you know, individuals can you know, discuss with Natural England to see if they can move forward with developments or gain some acceptance from Natural England in order to submit their planning applications. So, you know, there isn't necessarily a need to hold up everything. Obviously, we're trying to develop and build up and will provide a load of guidance, but you know, there is potentially ways people can try and move forward, but unfortunately it's just very all over the place, I guess is the word. You know, there's no one place that you can go and look, or you know, things that you can gain knowledge from. But hopefully that's what we're doing, is hopefully bringing all of that information together and providing that along with the SPD to the local authorities. Moving down to the next question, will this presentation be shared, please, afterwards? I believe yes, it will be shared. It'll be there'll be a link given to all the local authorities they can put onto their websites, and everyone will be able to watch it and listen to it again. All those who missed it can. So next one. When will the updated calculator be issued so we can understand the accurate phosphate loading figure that our scheme needs to mitigate? So as Oliver said, we're looking to provide a revised calculator pretty soon, so probably within the next week. So that shouldn't take too long before it gets up onto the website. But we are beholden to and awaiting Natural England's sort of final revision to their guidance, and they are, you know, essentially also beholden to awaiting the appeal on the Fareham case in order to be able to provide the suitable advice to go forward, so that it reduces or avoids the potential conflict over certain areas in all this issue. So we expect that to be October, November. So it will certainly be before the end of the year. But you know, one could say that if you're going with the best available evidence or information at present, the calculator as is or as updated next week is what you can go with. But just be aware that there will be a revised version in October, November. Developments also be subject to additional financial contributions on top of on-site treatment work, such as SUDs or packaged treatment plants. I think this is probably one local authority could answer. I think in reality, any cost would be up front, but does anyone on the local authority side want to answer? I'd assume that it may be under Section 106 that all the costs arise rather than an annual charge or anything like that.
It's Andy Redding from Sedgemoor here. I mean, the question sort of refers to looking at on-site solutions, referring to SUDs and packaged treatment plants. I mean, my view would be if it is ultimately achieving what it needs to achieve in terms of nutrient neutrality on site, then there won't be any other financial contributions other than what you've referred to about what might need to be secured through legal agreement in terms of perpetuity, maintenance of perpetuity. But there won't be any sort of double counting of contributions if a site is dealing with its issue within the site boundary through SUDs or packaged treatment plant proposals.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. That did answer what I thought the answer would be. Okay, next one. What is the timescale for the preparation of phosphates SPD? So Oliver's presented, so we're hoping to get the draft to the local authorities in about 6 weeks' time, which puts us into October. We are pushing to try and get it done as quickly as we can, but there is ongoing work, not least the conclusion of the solutions report, but also legal updates, the conclusions of the mapping, and then also some other policy development or policy assessment as well. But we are pushing to get it as quickly as possible. But October time is when the draft will go to the local planning authority. Are package treatment plants likely to be appropriate close to new existing drains when they need a cordon sanitary when they're used? Well, I think one of the things about package treatment plants, and I'm sure Ollie can add a little bit more, but I think the key point about them is that not only is there a preference that developments feed into the existing water treatment network where they can, I think that it's also part of the national policy statement or framework that indicates that they should be feeding into the network. So in reality, I think there is a lot of pressure to using the existing waste network system, and the package treatment plants are really only that suitable out with where the network is available. Whether they're likely to be appropriate close to new existing dwellings, I can't answer that. That might be one for the local authority or Oliver to answer. Is anyone aware of how package treatment plants are being dealt with specifically?
Yeah, Pete, it's Oliver here. I suppose just picking up on that, it's the guidance we were getting from Wessex Water. I suppose is that the packaging plants need to be compliant with the building regulations on the Environment Agency, kind of their policy, as you kind of alluded to. So they're the key requirements that need checking in terms of whether or not package treatment plants could be put in place. I suppose reasons why some of them might be getting rejected if they're not compliant with those. But yeah, I think just reiterating the point that again, it's the preference is to be draining direct to the mains where possible. But yeah, in terms of that specific question, we can provide a more detailed response in the Q&A response.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie.
Sorry, it's Helen Vittery here. There is also the interim guidance that's been published on the Planning Authority websites.
Excellent. That'll probably answer the question, I'm sure. The next question was, can Wessex Water potentially adopt PTPs if they're built to adoptable standards? As Ollie said, Wessex Water have said that they can, if they achieve all the required design and build standards. And another one on package treatment plants for a specific site question. I probably wouldn't want to comment on specific planning applications within this, but I would say you need to seek discussion over that question with the local authority, the specific local authority. The planning inspector have refused a number of planning applications relying on package treatment. I don't know the cases involved, and we don't know the cases involved, so I couldn't really comment on that. But it's the question would be, the reasoning for why they have refused them. I'm sure they would have given reasons for refusal, and it could well be relating to design or whatever, and might be suitability in terms of where those locations are and all those kinds of things, or it might even be whether they're actually providing sufficient reductions to achieve what they need to achieve. So I can't really answer that any further than that. Another one about package treatment plants from Bradley Ford, about the removal rate. Again, I won't talk about a specific development, but I will say that in order for and I won't even talk about planning permission per se, but I can talk about the habitats regulations and the requirements all set down, and all the issues that we're dealing with in relation to phosphate levels within and impacting on the Ramsar site and the international wetlands. Is that the site has to be, your development has to be shown to be nutrient neutral, phosphate neutral, so that there is no increase in phosphate into the network impacting on that site. Anything other than that is going to, be shown to have a potentially significant impact, and therefore I would not be surprised if the local authority is mindful to refuse on that basis. In the previous meeting, it was pointed out you're relying on constructed wetlands and tree planting as the main mitigation methods. It's hopelessly unrealistic. There is no way that we will be able to secure the amount of land needed in the required locations for constructed wetlands at cost of 175 million plus and 40 times as much land for tree planting. If you continue to champion these options, we're never going to get out of this impasse. So I would more than likely disagree with the numbers that are put in that comment. There is nowhere any of the calculations or even the high level indications of calculations that we've seen that we'll need 700 hectares for constructed wetlands, if that was the only option. The wetlands, if you look at all of the options, and we haven't looked at the cost efficiency of things like the buffer strips, and as Ollie said, if you have a wide buffer strip in the right location, that can have a significant reduction of about 80% of phosphates from the overland flows, and that can be potentially a pretty good cost-effective way. But wetlands do come out as an option that removes quite a significant level of phosphates, and for the area of it, it's significantly better than quite a lot of other options, particularly land use options like taking land out of use or woodlands and so on. So I'd have to argue that those numbers are significantly over exaggerated in our view. We have done a very high level calculations for the year-on-year housing allocations for the local authorities, and the figures for if you went for wetland only, and in the worst case, and the figures were significantly, they were orders below that. So I think we don't want to exaggerate everything, because obviously that can cause anxiety for people and concerns that nothing will ever happen. And we want to alleviate that as well. The local authorities are very aware of the issues in terms of timescale, in terms of the need to get the planning applications through that can go through appropriately, and all of this work is aimed in that direction. So we shouldn't exaggerate things too much, and should be aware that we're all trying to do what we can to get to the solutions that benefit you. So if we are looking at the costs of wetlands, just to reiterate, yes, it's a cost, but we are aware that one or more developers are looking at other wetlands and are moving forward on the design and construction of those wetlands. And I know from a verbal conversation with a developer, obviously I don't want to say their name, but they have said that they don't think that the cost of the wetland will add to their affordability levels that they are contributing to. So I think it's doable. Obviously, larger developers have probably got a lot more flexibility and capacity for this. It's obviously a bit harder for the smaller and medium scale developments and developers, but that's at the forefront of the local authorities' minds, and they are doing all they can to try and move forward with that and get solutions for you. Moving on to Diamond Perry about PTP. So this is regarding to phosphate stripping and the amount of removed. And in reality, again, I just will refer to the answer that I said earlier about, if the key issue that we're all dealing with here, so not about any other planning issues. I cannot comment on any other planning issues, but I can say that the key thing in relation to the habitats regulations is that if your development and any options that you are using to remove or reduce your phosphorus, if they don't achieve a zero or a neutrality in phosphorus loading, then it's highly unlikely that the local authority would be mindful on the basis of the habitats regulations to accept that. If your development and your PTP are all signed off, that everyone's happy with the removal rates and your end calculation shows that you are phosphorus neutral, then the local planning authority will then determine the planning application on all their other criteria and requirements out with this point. Next one, as anonymous, when undertaking desilting, the arisings will likely be classed as hazardous waste. How will this be managed and at what cost? So this is a very site-specific question as well. It's not necessarily, I'm pretty sure that they won't necessarily be classed as hazardous waste. They may be classed as waste, but there's a whole host of ways of which the material can be used and managed and disposed. Some may result in costs and some less costs. It may well be that depending on the nature of the silt, etc., and depending on the site, silt can be used and spread on agricultural land, but it is going to be very much a site-specific consideration, and it's a consideration that needs to be identified for your management and maintenance for any particular site. Or one that would be taken into account if such site was being passed over to local authorities or to some other third parties or whatever for them to manage in perpetuity. But hopefully our guidance will have a bit more information on this. So expect to have a bit more of an answer, certainly about what range of potential classifications there may be and how they will need to be considered. Anonymous, while some companies are trying to create 100% P removal PTP, these are still in testing and development. They look at using chlorine to reach 100%. Surely this is going to cause a problem in 10 years' time where all our planning applications are delayed until we can solve the problem without too much chlorine going into the water, which is okay. So PTP is not the only solution. Obviously, we've looked at and discussed a whole range of solutions. So with the solutions report that will go to local authorities, that should provide to them a clearer idea of all the solutions that they can see coming through and see that may be credible and suitable. And then also the SPD will be looking and identifying the policies to move forward on and the options. So there's a lot in response to this in reality, and I think some of it comes down to what each of the individual local authorities are doing at the moment. But I'd just like to say that I really don't think that that we're delaying everything too far, or certainly a problem 10 years down the line in relation to chlorine is probably not going to be or arise in terms of how this person may view it, because there will be a whole range of other solutions. So I don't think every site is going to need PTP to come up with a solution. So I think we are aware of that, and obviously each PTP and how and what they discharge will be taken into account when they're put forward. And if a PTP is putting excessive chlorine into the system, then obviously there may be a need to go back to the drawing board on that. But hopefully there'll be there's a whole host of other solutions that will be available. Anonymous, still waiting to hear what the strategic solution actually is. What are the LPAs proposing to do? So I suppose just answering from what we're doing, there isn't one strategic solution. What we're clear on is that there's a whole range of solutions that we'll be putting forward. I think that the point to note is that some solutions may be short, medium term, and others will be longer term solutions, and they're not all necessarily what I call, they're not all non-policy solutions. Some solutions are policy solutions. Some of them are, as we've mentioned, engaging with Wessex Water and others, Ofwat and the Environment Agency, etc., to encourage better standards in the next AMP cycle as well, to again further alleviate this problem at the wastewater treatment works, rather than being a specific development requirement to resolve. And if we get a particular question directed at any of the local authorities, obviously they can put forward any other particular things that they want to in terms of work they're ongoing with. Anonymous, wetlands are very expensive to create, and manage tree planting is much cheaper. The figures for woodland does not include the phosphate that is absorbed in the timber, which will be tonnes per hectare of woodland. If this were to be included in the calculated tree planting, would be incredibly powerful and cheap method of mitigation. Well, there's 2 points to this. I don't want everyone to be going out thinking wetlands are very expensive to create and manage. That's not necessarily the case. As such, yes, they do have costs, but whether that cost is expensive is highly dependent on the site, the location, the scale, and all the various management and maintenance side of it. Oliver, do you want to talk about the woodland, because I know it's central to your mind?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so just in terms of woodland, how we're incorporating that in the strategy to start with, I think we identified that it is it can be a really useful solution, particularly looking at the riparian buffer strips and the importance that woodland will play in that. That's something that we recognise and something that will be becoming more apparent in our upcoming documents that we'll be producing. But I suppose, yeah, in terms of the actual phosphate offsetting, so we're only really specifically looking at the potential loading that can go to the rivers and to the streams. So in terms of what the actual loading from woodland will be to those rivers and streams, that's what's incorporated in the calculator, not kind of what all the other ways in which the woodland will treat the phosphates. Is specifically looking at the runoff from a woodland to the rivers in terms of the land use. To kind of try to answer that question there. But yeah, we understand that it is a really powerful tool, and it's something that we do want to encourage, and we are actively encouraging as part of our strategy.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. Next one, anonymous. Wessex Water are not going to assist when they are cashing in on the problem via their end trade arm. I think I just again reiterate the point I made earlier, is that all water companies have various restrictions and limitations on how and what they can do within and outside their AMP cycle. So I think it's possibly a bit unfair to say that about them cashing in via their end trade arm. I think what they're doing is coming up with something outside of what they can do to come up with a solution to a problem that others have. That's my response to that one. Anonymous, this is an environmental problem that has arisen from the way society functions, use of fertilizer in agriculture and discharge of unstripped wastewater from development. So what is being done nationally, it ends there, but done nationally. So this is a bit of a wider question, really. So I'll make a shortish answer, and in reality, it's one that there are other forum for this. Yes, I think let's break it into two parts. Firstly, about agriculture. There's been a lot of work on catchment sensitive farming in agriculture. It's potentially easy to blame agriculture, but a lot of farmers, and I know and have friends who are farmers, they don't want to do something that costs them more money, and if they're having to put down more fertilizer, it costs them more money. If they lose in soil, it costs them money. So I think, again, it might be that the issue is just scale rather than how people are doing things, and it is just a fact of scale that we have very large populations that need to be fed and need to live and need to work. So yeah, it is a problem of our society, and it's a problem that we are all looking at various different ways to minimise. And for example, Wessex Water works with farmers, etc., to look at ways of helping them come up with ways of minimising the amount of chemicals that they use, to minimise the way that they get into the watercourses. There are other organisations that do the same, whether it's the NFU or any others. In terms of unstripped wastewater from development, I think we're just lagging on this, and in reality, as a society, perhaps we're not all aware of what the outcome of our effluent is, and therefore we're not necessarily that informed enough yet to accept that to remove a lot of the issues that we're providing, it's going to cost us money, because removing not just phosphorus but all the other chemicals from our water is going to cost money. And obviously just moving forward on this point, again, the water companies and obviously the local authorities are going to be pushing for the next AMP cycle to have a lot more reduction wherever they can, to hopefully provide a longer term solution to this, and again hopefully to resolve this issue. And I think that's more likely going to be pushed at a national level. Again, as was said, this issue is occurring not only in the Solent, in Wiltshire, but in Herefordshire, in Kent and in Cornwall. So it's becoming to be felt around the UK, and yeah, it might highlight a national issue just in relation to effluent, that we all personally can put our voices to on this. So I'll now move on to the next one. Local that's the last bit of that. I think I answered it. So next one, anonymous. I'm trying to go through these as quick as I can. I might make quicker answers, or this might start being more repetitious. Is the FAQ sheet issued after this going to also include Q&As from the August 11th meeting? So this is from the other workshop. As far as I'm aware, that we will be providing all Q&As for all workshops, etc. In terms of timescales, Oliver, what sort of timescale are we looking at? It'll be probably in the next couple of weeks, I'd imagine. But Ollie, do you have anything?
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, we'll be publishing all the Q&As from all the sessions, and yeah, like I said, they're not timescales. Probably fair. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, anonymous. The impact of Wessex water improvement is massive. Okay, so this again, another one about Wessex Water and the sewerage network, and again, I think we've spoken enough about how and what constrains the improvements to this, and yes, it you know, the local authorities will be pushing as hard as they can for the next AMP cycle to have significant upgrades in order to reduce the phosphorus loading and thus make a longer term solution. So I won't add any more to that. Anonymous. The calculator assumes one new house equals 2.4 new population. Has this assumption been properly investigated, justified given the hidden households we are told about in connection with development of social housing policies? I won't talk about the social housing policies or hidden households as such. Essentially, the household number in the calculator is based on the Natural England's guidance, which was based on the long-term population across the UK and the long-term household averages. Obviously, this is now under a lot of scrutiny and discussion and legal discussions and legal cases under the Fareham judgment and the subsequent appeals that are going on. So all I can say is it was based on the guidance. It was based on long-term population and household trends. I don't have any information or knowledge about the hidden households. So I don't know, is anyone else got a response in relation to the aspect relating to hidden households?
It's Andy from Sedgemoor, Andy Redding. I think the only thing I'd add is I think it's an area we need to keep an eye on, both in terms of obviously what's going on in Fareham, but also keeping an eye on that 2.4. It's obviously based on Natural England's advice and guidance, but I do understand where the question's coming from in terms of things like newly forming households for the population who exist within the district itself, and so it's one of those things which I think as a group we need to make sure we acknowledge that there might be scope to refine the household formation going forward, but obviously what we can't do is veer from anything which we don't agree with Natural England on.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That's correct, and hopefully, I mean, as you say, there will be more, not necessarily flexibility, but a wider range of choice, so to speak, when Natural England's guidance does come out in October, November time, and it might make it suitable for local authorities to have something slightly different than just a flat 2.4. But at the moment, yeah, we can't change that until the guidance has changed, because otherwise we'll all be just going up against a brick wall of trying to prove that the value we've got is correct, and obviously that's very difficult to prove. Next one, who would be responsible for signing off for the construction of these methods if approved at the planning stage by LA, EA and so the construction of these methods, I assume that this would be in relation to the construction of either integrated constructed wetland or PTP or whatever. I would say that predominantly a lot of these may come down to planning conditions and getting sign off in relation to planning conditions. And for PTPs, obviously Wessex Water and the Environment Agency will probably have some particular scrutiny they would want before they signed off on anything. But I don't know, does anyone else want to add any more to that? I don't know if it does need more or not. If not, I'll just move on. I'm happy to be interrupted. If so, so Claire, can existing buffer strips already in place be used as future phosphate credits? I think you've got two words that answer that for us, Claire. The first one is existing, therefore it's part of the existing phosphorus nutrient baseline, and future means that it's already there, so it can't be counted as something additional. So unfortunately, no. Existing buffer strips are the levels of nutrients that we have are happening with those buffer strips in place. In order to show that we are reducing or offsetting phosphorus, we need to put in new ones, I'm afraid. Moving on.
Just to comment on that, Pete. So yeah, you're correct in that existing buffers can't be used. You know, they're already part of the baseline. But what we do tend to find is a lot of the existing buffers, based on the schemes that are out there, the compliance and the stewardship schemes, they're not that big and not necessarily as effective as they could be, for not geared up necessarily for phosphate reductions. So there is the potential to extend those buffer strips and to increase them from a couple of meters to 10-20 meters and change the type of plants that are on there, so more woodland planting, looking at energy crops as well. So there is the potential to improve those woodlands and increasing the size, which could then be an addition and achieve phosphate credits that way. But yeah, it's not as simple as, oh, I've got a buffer strip, can I get phosphate credits for it if it's already existing? But yeah, we would kind of look at the development of existing buffer strips and see how they could be improved.
Mm-hmm. Cheers, Ollie. Thanks for clarifying on that. Next one, Anonymous. We're all looking at the solutions you're putting forward, so very little new. However, SEC and Natural England aren't approving, supporting, or providing dialogue to deliver quick solutions to these SUDs or wetlands. Can Scaling and the LPA work with developers to try to bring small developer-led schemes forward? I will pass it over to the local authority after just saying, having been involved since I think about November last year, and in reality no one knew the scale and of the problem and what the solutions were. We have all been trying, and from our side we've seen a huge amount of effort from the local authorities, both in what they do and how they're helping us help them to move forward as far and as fast as we can on all of these things. But obviously the problem being that when developing a whole new policy, it does take a bit of time, but we are pushing forward. We are hopefully starting to come up with conclusions that can help the local authorities start to make decisions. But I don't know, does anyone want to make any other additional points here?
I suppose it's Andy from Sedgemoor. I mean, I suppose the thing anything I'd add to that, which you've sort of said already, is it's a relatively complex issue which we're investigating. We're trying to do our best to explore all the viable options and identify them over different timescales in terms of what could be delivered short term and long term. I think, as we said as part of the presentation, we fully appreciate the frustrations it has on blocking the developments which are currently in the system, but it is not through want of trying to engage with Wallace-Koning and lobbying government to try and find solutions.
Thank you, Andrew. Very well said, and in general that covers everything. I think the key point is also noting that in reality there is very little guidance on various elements relating to this as well. So it has all, a lot of it is being developed in quite a vacuum of having had no other supporting information. So it's just a case that it's something that's come out that's just hit an area where no one had anything to base anything off. But we are trying to do what we can, and I'm sure that it's worth you talking to your local authorities or relevant local authorities to see what or how they may have things that they can help with. So move on now. Anonymous, appreciate the effort so far, but it really seems like we're just going over what we already largely have. Blah 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 about site solutions. So I assume this is and the end of it, and the only such in the absence of strategic solution must be impact viability or entirely unfeasible. So yeah, as you can imagine, we're looking at solutions that are highly site specific, and thus could be very different across all of the local authority areas. So, you know, that is one particular point that everyone needs to be aware of. In terms of going over the same thing, what we wanted to do in terms of the identifying solutions and then developing the draft SPD is really to ensure that we were getting an idea of what was feasible, both in the view of developers, in the view of local authorities, and also the view of you know, key stakeholders like Natural England and the Environment Agency, etc. So yeah, it is taking a little time, but the key thing is that, you know, we are moving forward, and it is moving, and it will get somewhere. In terms of a strategic solution, I mean, if you're talking about a strategic wetland solution, for example, as Oliver said, you know, in terms of designing, gaining the consent or the relevant permits and permissions, etc., for that, and all the approvals for that, and then constructing it and then monitoring it, it's going to take some time to have a sole strategic wetland, for example. So that's why there's a whole load of solutions that will need to be cherry picked by the local authorities to determine what's the most suitable one within their catchment areas and the areas of their developments and so on.
Can I just come in on that?
Yes.
Alison Blom-Cooper from Somerset West and Taunton, just to say that very conscious that strategic solutions are a way off. The council will be taking a report to full council in October to explore a short-term solution to unlock some of the development that's currently held. So the council are currently looking at land purchase options for wetland creation themselves. We are engaging with Entrade around the Tone catchment to see whether or not we can unlock affected sites through that. And we are going ahead and employing a nutrient neutrality officer and additional planning officer specifically to help us deal with the applications which are held in abeyance. So we are looking to see what we can do in the short term ahead of any longer term solutions.
Absolutely, thank you, Alison. And yeah, I mean, you know, to sort of mirror that you know, things like that are going on across all of the local authorities. So nothing is just, no one's waiting for us to finish a draft SPD. You know, the local authorities are moving forward on a lot of areas of work to see what they can get done in advance that is worth doing in advance of that. So I'll move on. Bernie says, can you provide more information on reducing water usage and practical guidance? I'm sure Oliver can put down some links to some guidance. I think the point that Oliver made is that one of the key issues with reducing water usage is unfortunately showing that it is you know, effective in perpetuity, because the issue with the nutrients and with the evidence base. Sorry, I always get caught in the middle of a fire alarm test. Sorry, over now. The issue with it is the evidence base of you know, that water usage reduction measures will stay in perpetuity, and you know, that's why it's not necessarily going to be a massively useful solution, certainly not for private housing, and it's something that requires a sort of long-term management of, in terms of you know, ensuring that those measures remain in place. So Ollie, if you could make a note and see if there are any other guidance that you have on water reduction measures, but it's not really a practical solution, we think, for the Somerset strategy, or certainly not for majority of the developments. Next one, George Rose, regarding the further guidance on wetland creation, where, who will this come from and when? The Constructed Wetland Association is working with the Rivers Trust to produce comprehensive guidance for wetland creation to deliver nutrient neutrality as well as biodiversity net gain. It will dispel some of the myths within the current Stod Marsh guidance, such as wetlands less than 2 hectares being unreliable for PE removal. Absolutely, we're aware of work being undertaken from the likes of the CWA and the Rivers Trust. What guidance Oliver is referring to is regarding the key design parameters and the approach to calculation, I believe, for the fee removal the phosphorus removal potential for constructed wetlands. Is that right, Oliver?
Yeah, so two things to pick up on there. Yeah, when we spoke to Natural England in our technical stakeholder meeting, they mentioned the report that was mentioned in that comment there, and that work's been done. So that's one thing that I was referring to. But yeah, then we're also looking to try and develop how the phosphate offsetting could be predicted as well.
Lovely, thank you. Next one, anonymous, with Entrade looking to carry out their first market round at the end of September and developers having to bid for a required quantity of P credit, how can we be sure we're bidding on the right amount when the calculator is not going to be updated until November? Again, this is I guess an answer relating to time. Unfortunately, the calculator as it is now and as it will be updated shortly will be the best available information you have at the time. I'm not entirely sure how the local authorities themselves will deal with the difference between if you put in a planning application when one version of the calculator is then subsequently superseded. So I'll put an answer out or a question out to them if anyone can answer if you can on that. So if, for example, someone put in an application today using today's calculator and it showed their site was phosphate neutral, would that, on the basis of this issue of phosphate or nutrient issue, then would just put the planning application into all the other bits that you would then consider out with this problem? Or is that are they being held in abeyance until the conclusions of Natural England's update?
Perhaps I can come in on that, Peter. Decisions will be made on the basis of the available evidence at the time the decision is made. So we won't hold up decisions if we can make them, because we're waiting for an updated version. But as soon as the updated version is available, that will be the information we have to use on which to determine application. Okay,
excellent. Thank you very much, Alison. And I guess just to sort of further add to that is the calculator is I guess in quotation marks approved by Natural England. So Natural England are happy with it. So they would also go along with what Alison has said, that it's based on the best available information at the time. So there we go. Hopefully that's answered that one. So next one, anonymous. There's a lot of talk of the credit system being run by Wessex Water at its basic level. That is a way of raising monies for them to upgrade the system network to deal with phosphate issues. Why can't Wessex Water fix a figure? So again, just 2 points. I think we need to separate Wessex Water from Entrade, because Wessex Water can only use what they use to undertake and carry out the measures that they have to, that they're all agreed under their current AMP and under their various areas that they have to. Entrade is a completely separate entity, albeit it's linked to Wessex Water, or underwritten, I should say, by Wessex Water in a way. And that's because in order to have the in perpetuity aspect to any of the phosphate credits that they produce, they need to have some some body underwriting them. So to a degree, that's providing the certainty to people like Natural England that the credits that are bought through Entrade will be provided as such in terms of phosphorus removal. I don't want to, I can't talk too much about money because none of us know what those prices are, but all I can say is from what Entrade have said, it's essentially an economic market-based system. So if you're willing to pay a figure, you may pay that figure. If you're unwilling, then you won't. So I will move on to the next one. Anonymous, apologies, I missed the start. Is it correct that fallowing is now not favoured as a solution? So in terms of fallowing, in terms of a large-scale, long-term solution, I think it definitely isn't. In reality, just purely because of the land take and all the various impacts associated with that. But given the right site and the right timing, fallowing is or may be a suitable short-term option. And some examples that we've spoken to people about, for a larger scale development, fallowing can potentially unlock early phases of development until either specific or other solutions are then come on stream for the subsequent phases of a development to go ahead. So again, that's both a yes and a no answer to that one, but hopefully one that's useful. Anonymous, what would be the anticipated realistic time frame for an SPD to be consulted on and adopted by authorities nurturing England so it could be relied upon for planning decisions? I'd probably have to refer that to someone in the local authorities. Anyone got a timeline? So if we get to draft SPD to you in October, what sort of timescales are do we think we're looking at?
Hi Peter, it's Tessa Saunders here from South Somerset District Council.
Thank you.
Hi. It's in terms of timescales, I think it's the time taken to go through the democratic process. So it'd have to go to a committee to get signed off for consultation. So we take that through as quickly as possible to then go out to consultation. Obviously, then once we've got the responses, that would go back to Royal Haskoning and agreement through the policy group to determine what to consider the responses and what amendments need to be made before we could then finally present that to our committees for final adoption. So, we've got the 6 weeks consultation, but there will be a period of time either side of that where we need to, get sign off for our committees and, for the consultation and the adoption process.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Tessa. Yes, so there will be consultation, as Tessa noted, so you will get to comment on the draft SPD as well, but hopefully given your involvement in the stakeholder events and the outcomes of them, hopefully there won't be any significant elements of it that you'd be unhappy with, and hopefully it does provide some good opportunities once adopted for the local authorities to just and you to adopt or follow up on for your applications. So I would say please do support that consultation when it comes out, and I'm sure we will keep you updated on when that is likely. But I would be highly surprised if it doesn't come out before Christmas. But we'll all aim to get it out as quickly as we can. Claire Wright asks, will there be any sanctions if these deadlines are not met by the council's Royal Haskoning? Doesn't feel like there's been a huge sense of urgency so far. I can refer to the local authorities regarding sanctions, but I can only say that on behalf of Royal Haskoning, we've worked quite hard and as fast as we can on the solutions and on the discussions, etc. And hopefully the stakeholder events mean that when the SPD comes out for consultation, there won't be anything new or surprising, and everyone will be pretty much aware and happy with a lot that's in it. So we're hoping that will save time in terms of the consultation process. So I think other than that, are there any sanctions that the councils see or feel they want to speak about? There's a lot of pressure, we know, but I don't know if anyone wants to talk about sanctions. I think it's not necessarily fair when we're talking about a whole range of many different organisations that are involved in this process. It's not least Haskoning and the local authorities. We're working with lots of other organisations that are all feeding into this and the associated aspects that surround this whole area. So in reality, I'm quite happy to move on from that process. That question and answer. Anonymous, I've sat through several hours of these presentations, hopeful of learning how I can support my clients through this issue. I'm absolutely none the wiser, and I'm frankly losing the will to live. I have zero confidence that the answer will come clear through the SPD. My clients have live planning applications for small residential developments and they can't create a wetland. Please can you address what minor schemes might do this? Thank you. You know, the first thing I would say is, particularly in relation to small residential developments and developers, you know, we do understand how difficult this is, and you know, the SPD and the development of it require this sort of democratic process in order for all the local authorities to be able to make decisions and judgments that you know, are clear and transparent, that are the same across the board, and are compliant with all the various issues and requirements of the like of Natural England, etc. So you know, we do understand the frustration that timescales are having, you know, and we are all just trying to work as quickly as we can towards that end point. I think again, what Alison mentioned, measures that the local authorities are carrying out, that they are carrying out to try and enable, you know, current applications to be dealt with where they can, and I think all the local authorities are looking at ways that they can do something until the SPD is fully signed off. I don't know if any local authorities have any other particular examples or not, but I know Alison gave some good ones. I don't think we necessarily need them. But again, I would just say, I'd reiterate that the best thing is to talk to your local authorities or the local authorities you're dealing with, just to see if there is anything that they have or are doing specifically that might specifically relate to your scheme or schemes. I'm sure the planning officers will be providing support or advice on that as well. Anonymous, next one. If wetlands are seen as a solution, when will development be permitted? Well, the assumptions on the wetland is capable of doing, how much we have, how much phosphates it will remove, have to be proven before I was working for any developments permitted. If so, how long? Okay, so I like this question. So yeah, if we're looking at wetland solution, we have mentioned that we're always having to, because we're impacting on international sites or European sites, international and European sites. We have to adopt the precautionary principle. We have to be very evidence-based and justify the answers that we are all giving in order to get acceptance by the likes of Natural England, etc. However, I think the current discussions with the likes of Natural England, and we know, for example, they've been in discussion with a developer who's moving forward with integrated construction wetland designs, that we've been usefully asked to just be involved in terms of being there and you know, providing high level information to local authorities on how it's moving and so on. And what I guess the answer to this is that there is and will be a formulae and calculations that people can use to calculate how effective a designed wetland will be. That formula will need to be conservative in order to pass Natural England's acceptance in terms of being precautionary. And on that basis, once constructed and commencing its life as an operating wetland, Natural England would allow I believe, and we will try and provide a bit of clarification on that, but the indicators are that they would allow residences to move in to the associated or linked development when the site starts operating, but it would need to have a couple of years, and the monitoring is still being developed, but I think it is pretty much there. So hopefully Natural England will provide some guidance on that soon. But the monitoring will carry on for a couple of years at least, or a couple of years, to determine or measure what the actual phosphorus uptake is. So there are two endpoints from that. Well, no, there's three. You're either therefore offsetting the amount of phosphorus or taking that amount of phosphorus off and improving it to the level that you said your wetland would, in which case everyone is happy, or the wetland may be not taking off as much phosphate as it would, and therefore the amount of offset would need to be improved somehow, either through changing the operation within the wetland or expanding it and so on. So all this will all need to be thought of in any wetland application and design, but predominantly because you're using a precautionary approach to the calculations and the designs, provided they're all done appropriately, we're fairly confident that they should all be operating and extracting more phosphorus than was calculated. So hopefully that option would be very rare, but there would need to be some thinking on that in your application. And then if your wetland is actually operating and it's operating above what was calculated, then that is essentially an opportunity for that exceedance of operation to be sold as potential credits. So again, that sort of ties in with this intention to and need to have a accredited system of monitoring and a database of all of the phosphate credits and so on and so forth, so that they can be bought and sold, or certainly the awareness of where they are and what they are and how they're operating, etc., to be held and understood in order to make the likes of Natural England happy. So that's that. So hopefully, yeah, a wetland could be constructed and residences could start being sold or move into when that wetland starts operating. Next one, Nicola Quick, please can planning officers put a public note on planning applications that are held up due to phosphates to ensure transparency? It's important the public are aware why applications are on hold for so long. It's not because the application isn't going to be approved, it's just sorting phosphates. I'll direct that one to the local authorities if anyone could answer that one.
Hi, it's Tessa from South Somerset. I think we have we've published before through the letters we have on our websites that we've written to the Secretary of State for MHCLG and DEFRA about the number of dwellings that are currently on hold across Somerset. So that's about 11,000. I'm not sure exactly how helpful it's going to be producing lots of lists of planning applications currently on hold, because obviously these changes more planning applications come in, but we haven't shied away from the fact that how many dwellings are on hold, and our sense of urgency in trying to address the issue of phosphates to obviously to unlock these dwellings and get them built, because obviously it's impacting on our 5-year housing land supply and potentially our housing delivery tests. So we're not holding back from recognising how many dwellings are currently on hold across the catchment.
Excellent. Thank you, Tessa. That's a perfect answer. So the next question, anonymous, in the short term, could planning applications be granted with a pre-commencement condition for phosphates? Again, I'd probably go back to the someone on the planning side.
Yeah, I can answer that purely because we've been given legal advice that we can't do that.
Okay, thank you. So next one, anonymous. Fundamentally, we need central government action if this issue is to be addressed. As usual, rural communities aren't seen as important. It appears that even our own MPs aren't really taking this time seriously. We must have joined up thinking to lobby both the central government and Natural England. So again, yeah, I think we've spoken about this, and Alison mentioned it in her presentation about the lobbying. So I don't really want to say any more. I don't think there's any more that we can usefully add to this. I think one of the key things to note, though, and this is more on the habitats regulation side, is that this isn't Natural England, just coming up with this issue just to cause frustration for everyone. They are having to follow European, the conclusions of European Court justice decisions in relation to the habitats regulations, and unfortunately that's how it's come about. And they could be under just or more, or they would be under the cosh, so to speak, if they allow this this issue to go unconsidered. And it would go against all of those legislation. So it's not that it's just caused there to cause frustration, but yeah, the lobbying will help. Hopefully, a more central government approach and also funding to resolve this issue. Next one, anonymous, simple question. Appreciate not easy. How will the development blockage be unblocked? So I guess the simple answer to a simple question is that along with all of this work that is being carried out, so along with the SPD, along with the work that the local authorities are carrying out both jointly and individually towards solutions, and the ongoing work with the calculator and the Natural England guidance is every one of the stakeholders involved, from the local authorities to Natural England, the Environment Agency, even Wessex Water and Trade and any others, are all trying to come to a conclusion and an end point where that blockage can be unblocked. It will happen, and it will happen in the shortish term, I think, and it will all come down to all of those things happening together. The problem is because there's a lot of things happening. It's hard to see when exactly that point will occur, but it is coming. So I think in terms of a sense of frustration that might be there, or anxiety, we are going to get to that point, and we are working to get there as quickly as we can. In terms of the local authorities, are all they're pushing to work on this. They're employing new people. It's not anything being held up. So I will move on from my soapbox on that to the next one. Anonymous, which other tools, platforms for connecting landowners and projects are you looking at, and when do you think a procurement exercise will start for this? I assume this is more in relation to the I suppose the phosphate credits, and I think Alison mentioned this earlier, that essentially legal advice is being sought in order to make such platforms fair and transparent, and also acceptable to the various parties who are involved, such as all of the local authorities, but also Natural England. So that is ongoing. We are also doing some work on that as well in the next couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, that is building towards the SPD, and we'll hopefully also commit some element of resolution to that as well. So I think in terms of procurement exercise for a database, I don't think we're well. I don't really want to answer that for the local authorities, because I'm not sure where we are, but it may or may not require a procurement exercise. But they are looking into and looking to develop that phosphorus credit bank or database, etc. So unless anyone wants to, any of the local authorities want to add any more to that, I don't think there's much more to add to that.
Peter, sorry, it's Helen Vittery, Somerset.
Yeah.
We did bid for some monies to look at doing this ourselves under the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund. Unfortunately, we weren't successful, but we have been invited to rebid in the winter. So of course we will be looking to do that, because we think it's so important and we need to make sure that this is in hand for ourselves anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it will be very useful to have something, but it's got to be the right thing, and everyone has got to be signed up to it. So yeah, it's not a quick and easy task, but it should, again, as I say, with all of these things going on, it will hit the same point as everything else to remove this blockage. So then, anonymous, talking from SPD, what's the SPD intending to achieve as that has not been explained? So supplementary planning document, does local planning, does anyone from the LPO team want to just say what an SPD is, just to clarify?
Hi, it's Tessa again for South Somerset. So it's supplementary planning guidance that provides extra guidance on a policy approach. So it needs to link to a policy in our existing development plan documents. So most likely that will be our biodiversity policies. And it becomes a material consideration in planning decisions. So, it is a formal planning document.
And I suppose just to add to that, it's Julie Reader-Sullivan, that has to be based on evidence. We can't just produce it until we've got the evidence. So this is why it is a process.
Yes, yeah. And also it's democratic, so obviously it has to have people's consultation on it as well. Excellent, thank you very much. Hopefully we're starting to get through the questions. Anonymous, it does appear that one of the major polluters, agriculture, is not being tackled at all based on the fair share principle that Wessex we ought to keep talking about. At the moment, we're being asked to pay to carry out improvements of phosphate removal that they should be doing as part of the ELM stewardship schemes, is partially calling that agriculture appears to be given an additional period until February to comply with water improvement. I don't want to discuss any more about whose fair share or fault or things like that. I think, needless to say, all of that is where lobbying to national government might influence things. And again, just refer back to Alison's point about lobbying to national government and others where relevant. So next one, anonymous, why aren't the government agencies, naturally in the EA, involved in these meetings? They are key. Well, they have been involved in the stakeholder events, and they may or may not be listening in to this one. But they have been involved and not just in the stakeholder events, and I know that they have regular meetings with local authorities over this issue. So they are involved and they are supporting us all in trying to come to conclusions, and we're very happy with the support that they have provided, and also the likes of Wessex Water as well. Anonymous, on the Wessex Water point, have you explored regulated asset-based investments as it's happening in the nuclear industry and in London for sewerage improvements? I don't know off the top of my head how that route works. So I might have to either go back, we might have to give you a written response to that. If no one from the local authority has any response they can make to that. Oh, I would imagine that if that was an opportunity, we would have looked at it, but we will come back to you with a response on that. Anonymous, was the approval of the AMP7 a breach of the HRA regs? Not at the time, I guess is a fairly simplistic response. At the time, it was thought that it wasn't, but obviously, as was mentioned, the ECJ case and the outcomes and conclusions and when they were determined by Natural England occurred after agreement of those of the AMP7. So moving on, in other LPA areas, they've used SIL money to purchase areas of land and provide strategic mitigation land. Why is this not the case in Somerset? I think that's one we can ask to the LPAs. I know there is a good answer for that.
From a Mendip perspective, we don't operate SIL, so that's not something we could do. And I'm sure other authorities will come in.
Yeah, I would only just add to that the SIL is already committed for other infrastructure projects. So we wouldn't, if we did that, we would be not delivering schools or other pieces of infrastructure. So we need to think up, alternative mechanisms. And where I've come from previously under habitat regs, we've dealt with it by way of Section 106 contributions to deal with these matters.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm just looking now down. I don't want another question about Wessex Water. I don't think we need to answer the resilience objective.
Sorry, Peter, just to step in. It sounds like a few people might need to head at 12:30 for other meetings. I just don't know if you'd like to maybe potentially try and wrap up if you can.
Yes. Okay, thank you for highlighting that. So yeah, we could go on answering the questions. I think probably a lot of them are all coming. They're all starting to merge and be fairly similar to a lot of questions, but we will highlight those that do and make an additional response to those we haven't covered. I think the key thing that we're all taking home, and we have been aware of and been constantly working to, is the fact that it is a big issue that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible, and the development of the SPD will go well towards removing that blockage by enabling those material considerations to be made in the planning applications, and also for those agreed solutions to be more easily identified and implemented by all of the developers and planners, etc. So thank you all for listening in. We will make a response to the remaining, there's about 10-15 questions, so we will make a response on those, and we will send out, as Oliver said, the responses to the Q&As for the stakeholder events, and also the March event as well. So hopefully they'll start coming out one at a time over the coming weeks. But thank you all very much for listening. I know I'd want to extend my thanks also to Oliver. It's a lot to go through and a lot to cover. So thanks, Oliver, and thank all the local authority people for attending and those for answering both on and off, or before and after, or before and during this as well. And we will be moving forward with, as we say, the calculator revision. That will be out probably sooner than anything else, and then the work on the draft SPD as early as we can in October, and I'm sure the local authorities will also be doing the normal regular fortnightly updates, etc., for you to just be aware of where we are and where we're going. So thank you all for attending, and we will all head off for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.